Thank you, as I said, for bringing me in to talk to you guys. As Sarah mentioned, what we're doing with Jewcer is something that I want to introduce to you guys, which partially is are different things that you guys are already doing. So it kind of fits into what present tense does. So a couple of, just for me to feel the room a little bit, have people here heard of Jewcer before this?
Don't put your hands
Yes.
up so you can see you.
Great. Okay, so our marketing actually does work a little bit. That's great. So I'll tell you a little bit about my background. My background is actually from a completely different field. I used to work for NASA for 8 years. I come from mechanical and aerospace engineering. My PhD is in mechanical and in aerospace engineering, and my undergrad is in electrical engineering. About 4 to 5 years ago, I started being more and more involved with the Jewish community, and actually my entryway was the Israeli-American community in Los Angeles. If any of you guys ever visited LA, you would know that there are parts in LA that you literally think like you're in Israel. There are about 300,000 Israelis in LA, and my kind of like entryway into that was creating an organization which is called Bina, which was around intellectual conversations and intellectual events. Today everybody knows about TED Talks and all that kind of stuff, but we did that about 5 years ago within the Jewish and Israeli community. So that was kind of like my entryway into this. And about 3 years ago, I guess 2.5 now, 2.5 years ago, as part of Bina, we noticed two different kind of processes or things that are happening in the Jewish world, which personally hurt, or I shouldn't say personally hurt, but personally kind of like touched 5 of us. The two things were, one was that there are a lot of people that were not really connecting through the usual synagogue organizations, things like that, to Jewish or Israeli initiatives or ideas. So if I assume you all heard now about the Pew study and all that, it's very clear that there's a lot of people that want and are willing to connect with things that others might consider as Jewish ideas, but they don't necessarily have the entryway or don't know about it or things like that. So that was one thing that we noticed. The other one that we noticed that is not a Jewish thing, but it's something that personally bothered me, that there's a lot of people with amazing ideas, really amazing ideas, that don't always necessarily have the resources or the knowledge in order to turn them into reality. And that's where, of course, present tense comes into play and other kind of organizations. The problem that we're dealing with Jewcer is the connection between community engagement and, of course, the financing of funding the ideas. So that's kind of like when we started Jewcer, we started investigating that challenge within the community. And one of those tools that we found to be very successful is crowdfunding. Now, I'm sure that, I don't need a show of hands, but I'm sure you guys heard of Kickstarter, Indiegogo, all those kinds of crowdfunding platforms, right? People have heard of this, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Good.
Yeah.
The difference is, and that's where we really come into play here, is that when we launched Jewcer, and by the way, when I say we, it's like 5 of us. There were 3 Israelis and 2 Americans getting together. We noticed something that is missing with crowdfunding. I don't know, has anyone here ever experienced crowdfunding in the room? Anyone? No, great. So, I'm sure that if I would ask you, you would think, and that's the problem or the challenge that we're facing all the time, you would think that with crowdfunding all you need to do is create a page and people throw money at you. A lot of people think that, and Kickstarter, Indiegogo, all of them have made a great job at making people feel that it's very easy to raise money. The reality is that when you create an initiative and you start trying to raise money, you're actually facing the odds of less than 30% success rates. Is everything okay? Is the sound okay?
Yeah, we're great.
Okay.
Someone just came in, so we're good though.
Okay, no problem. So
Let me get your
really
chair.
that is what we were facing when we started Jewcer, and that is that chances are against you. Essentially, if you're running a crowdfunding campaign, and we can get into a little bit more into that, but when you're running it and it's not around some gadget or around, I'm sure you've seen gadgets like a watch connecting to your iPhone and things like that. If you're doing something in the social good kind of environment, your chances are even lower than that. So what we decided to do with Jewcer is connect crowdfunding with mentoring. So Jewcer in itself, if you would ask me what is Jewcer, Jewcer is actually a consulting firm, or I would say a mentoring group. We mentor initiatives within the Jewish world how to use crowdfunding in order to turn their ideas into reality. So that's what Jewcer is. So it's a platform, but alongside with it is a group of people that are working constantly to either teach you, mentor you, go through the whole process of getting you from point A to point B. Now, this point A and point B can vary between different initiatives, but in general, it is people that come to us and say, I have an idea and I need an X amount of money and I need to raise it in order to be able to do it. So it's not very different than the outside, I call it the real world, outside the Jewish world, where somebody has an idea and they need money and they need to raise money for it. The difference is, of course, is that with all those social innovations or social startups, and Jewcer is, for example, one of them, there is no real business model. At most, and it would be great if you become sustainable. You're not going to be millionaires from anything that you would do within the Jewish world. Except for maybe J-Date. I think that's like the one that is actually making money. So that's really where we're at, and that really kind of like governs what we do and how we behave. So it's not that like we gave up on the idea that it's going to make money, but we see it ourselves as making impact within the community. So if there's any questions about that, stop me now. By the way, at any point, raise your hand, ask me a question, no problem. I'll dive a little bit more into the crowdfunding and the real core ideas that we have within Jewcer. So everything until now, I think, is just a background. Is that all good?
Sounds good.
Yeah.
So, generally speaking, when we're talking about crowdfunding, what we speak of is, of course, about how to get an initiative to be able to raise money from the community. And what I'm about to tell you is the secret, and it's not a secret sauce in any way, but it's the core idea behind everything to do with Jewcer and the community engagement that we do. Believe it or not, we teach every initiative not to ask for money. Okay? We actually teach them to do the opposite of that. So, I'm not talking about the opposite of giving money, but I'm talking about the opposite of asking for something. You're actually are offering something. So rather than asking for money, you're offering something. And the core idea is that you're offering someone the opportunity to be part of your initiative. And that's really the core of everything we do within our mentoring, within every point along the process of raising funds, is to realize that if you're going to walk around and ask for money, right now the reality is that your chances are very low of reaching your goal. However, if you turn your initiative into something that you can allow a bigger group of people to take part in it, give them not just the feeling, but the real status of being part of it, you're turning your initiative from a fundraiser into a movement. Now, these are all words, but let me give you an example about different things that we place as the goal. So, we all know what the starting point is of every initiative. It's you have an idea and you need money. We teach them that your end goal, if I would ask you what is the end goal, everybody would say very quickly, well, to have the money. Well, we go one step beyond that, just a small step, but it clears up that core idea that I said before. The end goal of running a campaign on Jewcer or running a successful crowdfunding campaign within the Jewish world is that we want people to walk around anywhere they go and say, not I gave money to this, because I guarantee you don't hear that a lot. But what you do hear are people saying, I'm part of that. I turned this into a reality. I made this happen. So now, when I define those 2 points in time, where you start, when you have an idea and you need to raise money, and the end goal, which is now getting people to be able to walk around and say, I made this a reality, or because of me this happened, or I'm part of that, everything else is your campaign on Jewcer. So that kind of like defines those 2 points in time. Now, let me take a step back. Now I explained that. Let me take a step back and, go a little bit even backwards to this background and what was mentioned before about crowdsourcing. Jewcer is part of crowdfunding, and crowdfunding is a sub-field of a bigger field called crowdsourcing. Okay? Crowdsourcing is essentially the problem of the challenge of taking a big problem and turning it into small, manageable pieces of tasks in order to create the whole and finish it. So you guys, I hope, use a lot Wikipedia, for example, and any examples like that are examples of crowdsourcing. The reason crowdsourcing is so successful and so wildly used is exactly that core idea that I now mentioned. What they did is they took a big challenge and broke it into smaller tasks or smaller places that now people can feel part of making it happen. So, do you guys know of any other examples by any chance of crowdsourcing that's being done in the Jewish world? Anyone? I'm just trying to make sure nobody's falling asleep. Any example you guys heard?
I know from the theater world that there've been Jewish theater.
I cannot hear, so somebody needs to either repeat it.
Or you can come closer.
Okay,
to the
I'll come
computer.
closer.
Here, why don't you sit here? The question person can sit here.
Yeah.
There you go.
So in theater, in Jewish theaters have tried crowdsourcing or crowdfunding as a way to
Sarah,
make.
you have to do that thing with the microphone.
Oh, is it? You can't hear.
You should talk straight to
Talk right here.
I'm talking
Yeah.
to them.
We don't have
Sarah,
the mic.
just increase the microphone.
Okay.
You know that thing that I showed you?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, just increase it a little bit.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
Here we go.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, so there have been Jewish theater projects that have tried to do crowdfunding for a play, a Jewish play. And I've seen them try and not do very well with it. So they're looking for $10,000 and they end up with, $800, $1,250, something like that.
Right. So that's examples of crowdfunding, and that typically fails because of what I said before, is that what people really need with crowdfunding is not the platform. What they really need is the guidance. Okay, and I'll get to that in a second, and we already touched that. I meant general examples of crowdsourcing. Have you guys heard of Haggadot?
What is that?
No, I think she's actually either present tense or ROI. You guys, so Haggadot is a project where people submit pieces of their interpretation of the Haggadah, the Passover Haggadah, and every person puts in different pieces, and all together you can build your own Haggadah. And you can pick from other people's submissions. So that's an example. Another example is something that I actually built about a year ago called Junovations. I don't know if you guys ever encountered that. I created a wiki map where people can put their Jewish innovations on a map. Any person can go on there and just put their innovation on a map, describe it so that others can find it and, exchange information and communicate with each other. So it's different examples where people contribute just a little bit in order to make the whole actually substantial and useful. Okay, so that's kind of like one example or a few examples of that.
We're moving you.
Give me a round.
We're moving you around.
We're moving you onto the table, if it fits.
It's not a big deal if it unplugs, actually, right?
Oh, right.
Yeah.
But this one is.
There we go.
Okay, so I'm missing a couple of people, but that's...
Just push the table.
Here we go. Now I'm singing.
There's the
Great.
table.
Now I feel like I can almost have that juice over there.
Can you move your...
So those are examples of how crowdsourcing can be used, and I've given actually many talks in different places and conferences on how the Jewish world can use crowdsourcing. I'm not even talking here about crowdfunding, but let's now dive a little bit into crowdfunding specifically. And as I said before, the real idea behind it is taking this big task of raising, as you mentioned before, for example, $10,000, and trying to see how can we raise that from the community. So there's a couple of ways of doing that. Of course, Jewcer is one of them. Of course, there's traditional ways of writing grants and trying to find philanthropists and all those kinds of ways. The way that Jewcer does it is kind of like a bi-directional thing, and that means that we work with every initiative. The initiative comes to us, and we work with them in order to find the best way that the initiative can raise the money. And I'll give you an example. You would come to me or come to us, and you would say, I need to raise $10,000 for a play that has something to do with the Jewish world. I'm just picking that as an example. What I would do immediately is start, of course, analyzing all your social media, everything, your resources within the Jewish world, and then start working with you on a plan on how to utilize your resources. And by resources is, of course, the time, your networks. Some initiatives have some money for marketing, for example, and we build together a plan to use crowdfunding. Okay, so that's really the reality of how the process goes, and I don't want to now dive more into it because you're really going to fall asleep because it's not about the things that you guys are interested in. But I want to say a couple of words about crowdfunding in general, and that's very important when I want to go towards that grant opportunity that we have. Crowdfunding in some ways, and some people can look at it, in somewhat of a way to test your idea. So rather than, and it's a very interesting way of looking at crowdfunding, let's put crowdfunding aside and let's talk about an event that you want to run within your community. You have an idea for an event, and you're now sit in a room with a committee, just like the group that you're sitting right now, and you guys all think together that it would be really good to do a Israeli Independence Day event in the park. That's your idea. Maybe in Chicago it's too cold. I don't know. Here in LA it's very nice. But suppose that's your idea. So now the committee breaks into one person needs to get a venue or the park or whatever it is and get the catering and all that kind of stuff. And you figure out your budget and you start paying vendors and all that kind of stuff and you create flyers. I'm describing the usual way and I'm sure all you guys either went through it, created it, we've all been through that in one way or another, either as customers or in organizations. And then comes the day that you start asking for people to buy tickets, and all of a sudden, like we've all been through that, people are not buying tickets. You now panic, you start investing more resources into it, you bring other organizations on board, you just do the usual stuff, and then at the end, hopefully, you recover your costs. Okay? If I put the lens of crowdfunding to look at that situation, I would say that you need to know if the community even wants what is it that you're doing. And what do I mean by that? I mean that it's great that you're sitting in a room and it's great that you think you know what the community wants, but the reality is that you don't know exactly what the community wants. And that's a great start for any entrepreneur and any person that with a startup is that you don't know what your customers want. And in this case, it's the community. You might think you know, and you can use your past experience, and you should use experience of others, but you don't really know exactly what they want. What crowdfunding does is flips it over and says, before you invest money, before you sign up on a venue or the park or, get a singer or a performer or something like that, go out there and see if the community really wants what you're about to offer them. So it is not that you're not going to do any marketing, and it's not a magic kind of a thing that you just create a page and people sign up, but at least you do all these things before you invested any money. And you have the choice, and different models allow you that no money even exchanges hands if you don't reach a certain goal. For example, it's different models of crowdfunding. But the reality is, and the real core of this idea is that now you're putting those horses as if in front and at the beginning of the process. You're putting your marketing at the process right at the beginning. You're essentially coming out to the community and asking them, do you want this? And that's really what crowdfunding is. And that's why it's so successful, but in many cases it's not, and that is okay. It's okay that some ideas are not successful. We are trying with Jewcer to make them more successful by experience and, getting people more of a reality check. I can tell you today, just this morning, someone called me up and said, I have a great idea for a movie. And he told me about the movie, and I think it's a great idea. And then I asked him, how much money do you need? And he said, I need $100,000 to raise for it, which is totally cool. And I said, that's great. How much time do you have to spend on it? He said about 2 hours a week, 2 to 5 hours a week. And I was, I'm Israeli, so I'm allowed to be very direct. And I said, in what world do you think that 2 hours a week would get you $100,000? And that's very true. Crowdfunding is not magical. It's not going to get you way more money than you would have otherwise. It just makes sure that under certain circumstances you could raise much more money with much less of a risk. So, of course, I told him there's no way he can raise $100,000, and he's more than welcome to try. I'm not going to tell him not to go on Jewcer, but, I sent him to do a little bit more research to try and see how we can create a bigger of a network. Now, I asked him about his Facebook, and for example, he doesn't have a Facebook fan page, he does not use Twitter, and he has a couple hundred friends on Facebook and barely uses it. So it's great that he has a great idea, and that's, having a great idea is a great point to start. But a great idea is not enough to raise money for it. And that's really what we do with crowdfunding, is that we turn this great idea, along with your time that you invest in it, along with your resources of a network, into real money that can now be invested in that initiative. Okay? So any kind of questions at this point?
Yes.
Yeah.
What if you begin a crowd funding initiative and only get halfway through? Now you can't deliver your idea.
If I understand, did you ask that if you only reach half of the
Yes.
what happens then?
Yes.
So it really depends what kind of a platform you use. The general standard within the industry these days is, on one side there's Kickstarter, where if you don't reach your goal, actually no transactions happen, and then essentially nobody pays for anything. The method that we're doing, the model that we're doing, is actually the other side of the spectrum, is that you actually get everything that you raise, meaning if you only raise half of the amount, you get what you have raised. However, in the mentoring and in everything, first of all, you should know that most of the initiatives on Jewcer end up reaching their goal. We have higher than 70%, because we actually, before you even start, we work with you on the goal amount. And we have experience. If you tell me that you only have 2 hours a week, I'm going to adjust my suggestion for your goal. But suppose you only reach half of it, and it happens, we advise people to either, they can always return the money, they can always do that, or find what they can do with the money in order to satisfy the people that have invested in their initiative. And that's very important, because the way we teach it is that you are not collecting money, you're actually adding people to your team. Now, not all of them can be executive directors, but these are people that you're building a community around it. And that's why you have to have an exit plan, even if you reach something that is not your goal. Of course, if you reach your goal, it's very clear what you need to do. But if you don't reach your goal, we also work with them on what they can do to satisfy the people.
I have a
Any
question.
other questions?
I have a question. You want to look into it?
You mentioned risk, and I guess I want to flip risk on its head a little bit and ask you.
I can
You can't
barely
hear me?
hear you.
Okay.
Somebody can just read. If somebody can just
No, I'm gonna
repeat
come
the
forward.
question, you don't
It's
need
okay. I can go through. You mentioned risk, and I want to turn risk on its head a little bit.
Sorry, what?
You talked about risk. And
Yes.
I want to flip the question around a little bit. You talk about risk, I think, in terms of reaching your goal and having a successful whatever it is that you're doing. When I think about risk in terms of what I'm proposing, my risk is more about, is someone else going to come in and take my idea and run with it who has more means and ability than I do. And I worry that putting my idea out on a crowdsourcing website, I essentially, and working it out enough to try to get that investment, I'm opening myself up to that.
Good. So that's a great question, and it's very important to know. Crowdfunding is not for any idea. If the guys from Google would have put their idea for the Google search engine at the beginning on crowdfunding, the world would have looked different today.
Sure.
It is absolutely not for things that have a secret sauce or has something that you want to protect.
Okay.
And it goes both ways, because with crowdfunding, you actually want to be as transparent as possible. You cannot come out and say, I have this great idea to do something. I cannot tell you guys how it will be done, but give me money. Nobody would give you money. So therefore, I always suggest don't use crowdfunding for it. Go around your friends, family, investors or philanthropists for something like that. But if you feel that there's something you're going to lose by telling the world about it, then don't use crowdfunding. However, when we're talking about the Jewish world, I have yet to see an idea within the Jewish world that has a secret sauce that you can, under no circumstances, can share. We're talking about social good, all those kinds of things are not around some core idea that has some algorithm in it or something like that. It's more based on hard work and time and, volunteers and initiative, things like that. And I haven't encountered things like that. However, people do come to me sometimes with an idea like that, and I tell them, don't use crowdfunding. Don't even tell me the idea. Just go ahead and find investors.
Okay. And then I guess the second piece is when you talk about investment and having the exit strategy, what typically are is it a piece of the profit? Is it a membership? What are some of the options that people typically tend to?
That's a great question, and that's something that I made a mistake here by not being clear about it. When I talk about crowdfunding, and that's actually even a legal issue that's going on right now. When you're talking about crowdfunding in the US, other countries it's a little bit different, but in the US, you cannot and you're not allowed to offer incentives that are monetary. You cannot give equity or dividends to anything through crowdfunding. Okay? It's very important to know that. The only thing you can offer are rewards, t-shirts, pens, all sorts of things like that, and I'll get into a second what the good ones are, or rights of, I would say, bragging rights, like, you're a producer of a movie. You can have producer rights on IMDb when you're making a movie, for example. You gave $5,000 to a movie, you are a producer of that movie. All you did is gave $5,000. Now, the good rewards are ones, if you remember, or if you were in the room, I didn't notice who were and who came later. The core idea, and I'll repeat it again, is you're not asking for money. You're offering a way for people to feel part of your initiative. That is the core idea behind crowdfunding and behind Jewcer in general. So now, if you are creating an event for Passover, let's say a community Seder, okay? And for $50, you offer, if somebody gives you $50 to support this initiative, you give them a t-shirt. You can see that there's a little bit of a disconnect between what is it you're trying to do and what you're giving them as a reward. However, if for $50, actually when you start the Seder, you stand up and you thank all those that have supported, and those that gave $50, you mention them, mention their names, now it connects to the initiative itself. So I'll give you a more, what I just gave you is a very old-fashioned kind of way, like synagogues did that. That's not a cool way of doing it. But I'm working now, if any of you guys heard of Tamid,